close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the faint, distant sound of lapping water against ancient stone, and the slow, measured tread of a single pair of feet on a marble floor. It is very late. The city of Constantinople, that great jewel of the East, has long since settled into a deep, velvet darkness. But within the vast, sprawling complex of the great palace, a different kind of light still burns. Not the harsh glare of torches in the public squares, but the soft, unwavering glow of oil lamps behind thick curtains, illuminating spaces that few eyes have ever seen. Tonight, we will step softly into those spaces. We will let the heavy curtains fall back into place behind us, and we will listen for the whispers that have been trapped in the stone for over 1,000 years. This is not a story of battles or emperors, not yet. This is a story of the women who lived at the very heart of power, but who were themselves wrapped in a silence as deep and as thick as the palace walls themselves. This is the story of a Byzantine empress in the quiet hours. The great palace of Constantinople was not a single building, but a city within a city, a labyrinth of audience halls, chapels, gardens, and private apartments that sprawled down the slopes toward the Sea of Marmara. Think of it less as a home and more as a vast, sacred machine, designed to produce a single effect: the overwhelming, almost divine majesty of the Roman emperor. Every corridor, every mosaic, every carefully arranged column was a stage prop in an endless performance of power. And at the center of this performance, hidden away, was the gynaeceum. That is the word the Byzantine Greeks used for the women's quarters, the empress's domain, and it was a world unto itself. Unlike the harem of later Ottoman sultans, the Byzantine gynaeceum was not a place of idle pleasure or exotic captivity. It was a court in miniature, a center of politics, piety, and industry, all conducted within a narrow, shimmering cage. The empress was the absolute ruler of this realm, and yet she was also its prisoner, bound by etiquette, tradition, and the unyielding architecture of the palace. So, what did a night watch mean for a woman like this? It was not merely a guard patrolling the corridors. The night in the palace was a living thing, with its own rules and its own silences. As the sun set over the Golden Horn, a deep calm would begin to settle over the gynaeceum. The bustle of the day, the endless processions of silk-robed ladies-in-waiting, the whispered consultations with eunuch chamberlains, the droning of petitions from far-off provinces, all of this would fade away. The heavy bronze lamps would be lit, one, by a dedicated corps of lapidarii, whose entire existence was devoted to the care of light. The flames would cast long, dancing shadows across the porphyry floors, making the figures in the mosaics seem to shift and breathe. And in her private bedchamber, the Empress, the Augusta, would prepare for the long, slow hours of the night. She was never truly alone, not really. There were always servants within calling distance, eunuchs sleeping at her door, a scribe or a priest never far away. But there was a loneliness that came with the crown. the walls that protected her also imprisoned her, and the night was when that solitude became most palpable. One could hear the sea if the wind was right. One could hear the distant barking of dogs in the city below. And one could hear the soft, eternal shuffle of the night watchmen moving through the halls, their sandals whispering against the stone as they made their rounds, a pulse that kept the palace alive and breathing in the darkness. Let us slow down here. Let us picture a specific night, perhaps in the 6th century, during the reign of the Empress Theodora. She is perhaps the most famous of all Byzantine empresses, a woman who rose from the streets, from the theater, from a life that was considered scandalous, to become the co-ruler of an empire. But even she, Theodora, with her iron will and her political acumen, lived within these walls. On a quiet night, after the last of the evening prayers, after the final audience with her husband, Emperor Justinian, had concluded, she would retreat to her private chambers. Theodora's rooms were said to be even more sumptuous than the emperor's, decorated with silks from China and ivory from Africa, with gold leaf on every surface. But the luxury was not just for pleasure. It was a statement. Every cushion, every embroidered curtain said to the world, I am the Empress. I am the mother of the empire. But at night, perhaps, the statement became a whisper. She would sit by a window, looking out over the dark waters of the sea, or perhaps she would sit with a book of theological writings, for she was deeply interested in matters of faith. She was not confined to her room like a prisoner. She could move about the gynaeceum, but the gynaeceum was her universe. The corridors were her world. The night watchmen were her silent companions, their presence a reminder that the empire never slept, and neither could she, not fully. The guards outside her door were not there to keep her in. They were there to keep the world out. But they also sealed her in a bubble of protocol and ritual from which there was no escape, not even in sleep. There is a lightly humorous detail here that often gets lost in the grand histories. The etiquette of the Byzantine court was so elaborate, so painstakingly choreographed, that even a simple gesture of greeting could take hours to execute properly. For an empress, every movement was a performance. She could not simply walk to the window. She had to be assisted by her ladies, her train held just so, her veil adjusted, her hands positioned correctly. There were rules for how to sit, how to eat, how to receive a visitor. The highest compliment you could pay an empress was to be allowed to kiss her foot, which was covered in a jewel-encrusted slipper. Imagine the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of living under that weight every single day. And so the night, the quiet, empty night, was the only time she could breathe, only time she could let her shoulders sag just a little, the only time she could be, for a brief, fleeting hour, herself. But even then, the watches were there. The night watches were not just guards. They were also a form of ritualized timekeeping. The palace had no clocks as we know them. The hours were marked by the changing of the guard, by the recitation of prayers in the palace chapels, by the burning down of candles. The night was divided into 4 watches, each one a slow, deliberate portion of darkness. the Empress might hear the soft call of the watchman announcing the third hour, a voice muffled by stone and distance, but just audible enough to remind her that time was passing, that the world was still turning, that morning would eventually come. Let us move forward a few centuries to a later empress, Irene of Athens. Irene is a fascinating and somewhat dark figure, but we will approach her story gently. She was a woman of immense ambition who ultimately blinded her own son to seize power. But tonight, we are not concerned with that terrible act. Instead, let us imagine Irene in the quiet years before that, when she was still merely the empress consort, the wife of Emperor Leo IV. Her life was a constant negotiation between piety and politics. The palace in her time, the late 8th century, was a place of religious controversy, caught up in the great arguments over icons, the holy images that were being destroyed by the iconoclasts. Irene, however, was a secret believer in icons, and so her nights were filled with a different kind of tension. She could not openly display her faith. She had to hide the small icons she treasured, wrapping them in silk and tucking them away in chests where the emperor's spies would not find them. Her night watches were not just about security. They were about secrecy. She would wait until the palace was deep in sleep, until the guards had made their rounds and the corridors were silent. And then she would creep barefoot to a hidden chapel in the depths of the Gyneceum. There, by the light of a single lamp, she would kiss the forbidden images and pray for the restoration of the holy icons. The night was her accomplice. The darkness was her friend. The walls that confined her also protected her secret. This is the strange paradox of the Byzantine empress's life. The same walls that cut her off from the world also created a private world where she could be her truest self, where she could scheme, pray, weep, and plan, all hidden from the gaze of history. I want you to imagine the texture of those nights, not the grand events, but the small, sensory details. The smell of lamp oil and beeswax candles, the rustle of silk as a lady-in-waiting rearranges her mistress's robes, the faint, distant sound of a chant from a monastery across the city, carried on the wind that blows in from the Propontis, the cool touch of marble under bare feet, the taste of honeyed wine sipped from a cup of agate that has been passed down through generations of empresses, the weight of a golden diadem placed on a velvet cushion for the night. These are the moments that matter. These are the moments that make up a life. An empress might spend her days receiving ambassadors from the ends of the earth, settling disputes between bishops, and commissioning vast mosaics of the Virgin Mary. But at night, she was just a woman, alone with her thoughts, surrounded by 1,000 years of tradition and a palace that seemed to breathe around her. The night watches were not just a duty for the guards. They were a state of being for the empress. She too was a watchman of sorts, keeping vigil over her own soul, over her dynasty, over the fragile power that could be snatched away at any moment by a coup, a plague, or a whim of the emperor. The walls that enclosed the Byzantine empress were not just physical. They were walls of ritual, walls of expectation, walls of silence. She was expected to be visible only on certain occasions, to emerge from the gynoeceum like a jewel being taken out of a box for a special ceremony. Her beauty was a state asset. Her piety was a state necessity. Her fertility was a state obsession. And the night allowed her to retreat from all of that. The night was a small rebellion. Even as the guards paced the corridors, even as the eunuchs slept at her door, she could, in the solitude of her mind, imagine a different life. She could imagine walking through the streets of Constantinople, feeling the sun on her face, tasting the salt spray from the sea. She could imagine a world without the crushing weight of the diadem. But then the morning would come, and with it the chants of the palace clergy, the clatter of the eunuch chamberlains opening the shutters, the low murmur of the city waking up. And the Empress would rise, and the performance would begin again. The night watch would end, but the vigil of her life would continue. So as we settle deeper into this story, let us remember that the Byzantine Empress lived a life of immense power and immense restriction. The palace walls were her kingdom and her prison. The night watches were her solitude and her reminder that she was never truly alone. And in the quiet of the night, in the flickering light of oil lamps, between the sound of the sea and the whisper of ancient prayers, she existed in a state of sacred, silent watchfulness. That is where we will stay for a while. That is the world we are entering. Let the words settle around you like the folds of a heavy silk robe. Let the pace of the narration match the slow, measured tread of a watchman on his eternal rounds. There is no rush. The night is long, and the palace has many stories yet to tell. The night has many stories yet to tell, and each one is like a thread in the vast tapestry of Byzantine history, woven by hands that never saw the light of day, hands that worked by lamplight and candlelight, hands that were never meant to be seen. Let us turn our attention now to another empress, one who lived in a different century, under different stars, but who still knew the weight of those palace walls and the rhythm of those night watches. Her name was Theodora, but not the famous Theodora who rose from the theater to share the throne with Justinian. No, this was a later Theodora, the wife of Emperor Theophilos, who reigned in the 9th century. She is often called Theodora the Blessed, and her story is one of quiet endurance and hidden influence. Theophilos was a zealous iconoclast, a destroyer of images, much like the emperors before him. But Theodora, like Irene before her, cherished the ancient icons. She kept them hidden in the deepest recesses of the gynoeceum, in chests lined with silk, behind panels that slid open only in the dead of night. Imagine her, this empress, sitting in her private chamber, the room lit by a single oil lamp that cast long shadows on the walls. Her ladies-in-waiting have retired for the night, and the eunuchs have drawn the curtains. She is alone, or as alone as any empress can be. She reaches into a small wooden box, carved with scenes of the Virgin and Child, and pulls out a tiny icon of Christ Pantocrator. The paint is old, the gold leaf flaking at the edges, but to her, it is a window into heaven. She presses it to her lips, whispers a prayer, and then hides it again, listening for footsteps in the corridor. Night watches are her allies now, for the guards are loyal to her, not to the emperor's decrees. They have been sworn to silence. They know what she does, but they pretend not to. The night creates a conspiracy of silence, a pact between the empress and her servants, a gentle rebellion that takes place in the shadows. Let us walk with her through the palace at this hour. The corridors are lit by torches set in iron brackets, their flames guttering and swaying as the wind from the sea finds its way through the narrow windows. The marble floors are cold under her feet, and she wears soft slippers of felt that make no sound. She moves like a ghost, a living memory of the faith that the emperor has tried to erase. She is not afraid, not exactly, but there is a tension in her shoulders, a carefulness in her step. She knows that discovery would mean humiliation, perhaps exile, perhaps even death. But the need to honor the icons is stronger than her fear. The night gives her courage. The darkness wraps around her like a cloak, and she feels a strange kind of freedom. She is not the empress now. She is a woman who believes in something greater than the throne, and that belief sustains her through the long, lonely nights. Theodora's night watches are not just about waiting for dawn. They are about waiting for a time when the icons can be restored to their rightful place, when the churches can shine with holy images once more. And that time will come after her husband's death, when she becomes regent for her young son and begins the slow work of restoring the veneration of icons. But that is a story for another night. For now, she is still the hidden empress, the keeper of the forbidden flame, and the night is her sanctuary. Now, let us drift a little deeper into the palace, into a part that is rarely mentioned in the histories. I want to tell you about the Empress's bedchamber. It was not a simple room. It was a stage, a fortress, a sanctuary. The bed itself was a monumental piece of furniture, often raised on a dais, with curtains of heavy silk that could be drawn to create a private space within the space. The curtains were embroidered with scenes from the Bible, or with hunting scenes, or with the imperial monogram. They were meant to be beautiful, but they also served a practical purpose. They kept out the drafts, and they kept out the curious eyes of the servants. The Empress's bed was a place of ritual. There were prescribed times for rising, for retiring, for the changing of the linens. The bed was made by eunuchs who had been trained in the precise art of smoothing silken sheets. And at night, when the Empress finally lay down, she was surrounded by the scent of lavender and rosewater, by the soft rustle of the curtains, by the distant sound of the night watchman's call. But even in the bedchamber, the Empress was not entirely alone. There were always ladies in waiting who slept on pallets near the door, ready to assist at any moment. And there was the silent presence of the eunuch chamberlains who stood guard outside the door, their ears attuned to the slightest sound. The Empress's night was never truly private. She could not thrash in her sleep or snore or murmur without someone noticing. Her every breath was monitored, not out of malice, but out of a strange, suffocating care. She was too precious to be left alone. She was too important to be unobserved. And so the night watches extended even into her dreams. She might dream of a simpler life, a life where she could walk in a garden without an escort, where she could speak to a stranger without a formal introduction, where she could eat a meal without 30 servants standing in attendance. But those dreams were as fleeting as the candlelight, and she would wake to the reality of the palace. Let me tell you a small, lightly humorous detail about the Empress's bedchamber. It was said that the imperial bed was so large that it took 2 eunuchs to make it each morning. They would crawl across the mattress, smoothing the sheets, plumping the pillows, adjusting the covers. And they had to be careful not to leave a single wrinkle, because any imperfection would be noted by the senior chamberlain and could lead to a reprimand. Imagine the scene: 2 grown men, dressed in silken robes, crawling on their hands and knees across a vast bed, muttering prayers to themselves as they worked. The Empress herself might still be asleep behind the curtains, unaware of the quiet comedy unfolding just a few feet away. But the servants were trained to be silent, to move like shadows, and so the bed-making was a choreographed dance of hushed efficiency. It is one of those tiny human moments that bring the distant world of the Byzantine court closer to us. They were not all power struggles and theological disputes. Sometimes it was just 2 eunuchs trying to get the pillowcases straight. Now, let us step outside the bedchamber into the corridors of the gynaeceum. I want to describe the way the night feels in that part of the palace. The air is still, but it carries the mingled scents of beeswax, incense, dried herbs, and the faint, salty tang of the sea. The floors are polished stone, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The walls are covered in frescoes, their colors muted in the low light. There are alcoves with small shrines, icons of the Virgin or of a favorite saint, with a single lamp burning before them. The Empress might pause at one of these shrines, light a candle, say a prayer. The flame reflects in her eyes for a moment, and then she moves on. The night watchmen are stationed at intervals, each one standing silently in his designated spot. They are not allowed to speak, except to announce the hour. They are not allowed to sit or lean against the wall. They must remain standing, alert, for the entire watch. It is a tedious, exhausting duty, but it is also an honor, for the night watchmen are chosen from the most trusted soldiers of the imperial guard. They know that the safety of the Empress rests on their vigilance, and so they stand, hour after hour, listening to the silence, watching the shadows, counting the minutes until the relief guard arrives. There's a rhythm to the night in the palace. It is not a chaotic rhythm, but a slow, deliberate pulse. The first watch begins at sunset, when the bells of the nearby churches ring out the evening prayer. The second watch starts around midnight, when the city is at its deepest sleep. The third watch comes in the cold hours before dawn, when even the guards are fighting to stay awake. And the fourth watch ends at sunrise, when the palace begins to stir again. The Empress might be awake for some of these watches, or she might sleep through them all, depending on her mood, her health, her responsibilities. but she is always aware of them. The progression of the watches marks the passage of her life, the slow turning of the wheel of time within the unchanging walls of the palace. Let us consider another empress, a lesser-known one. Her name was Eudokia Macromboletissa, and she lived in the 11th century. She was the wife of Emperor Constantine Extaucas, and after his death, she became regent for her young son. Her story is one of political maneuvering and quiet resilience. But tonight, I want to focus on a different aspect of her life. Eudokia was a scholar. She loved books, and she spent many of her waking hours in the library, reading the works of the ancient philosophers and the church fathers. But at night, she could not read. The light was too dim, and her eyes were tired. Instead, she would lie in bed and compose poetry in her head. She would recite verses to herself, memorizing them, polishing them, until they were perfect. And then, in the morning, she would dictate them to a scribe. Her poetry survives to this day, fragments of it, and it speaks of longing and loss and the beauty of the natural world. She wrote about the sea, about the stars, about the gardens of the palace. She wrote about the night itself, the silence, the solitude, the strange comfort of being awake while the rest of the world sleeps. Imagine Eudokia on a night in late spring. The window of her chamber is open a crack, and the air is warm and fragrant with jasmine. She can hear the faint sound of water from a fountain in the courtyard below. The night sky is clear, and the stars are bright. She lies on her bed, her hands folded on her chest, and she composes a poem about the moon. The words come slowly, like honey dripping from a spoon. She does not rush. She savors each syllable. The night watches pass, and she is still awake, still composing, still weaving her verses. The guards outside her door do not know that she is creating something beautiful in the darkness. They only know that she is silent, that she is safe, that the night is passing as it always does. But for Eudokia, that night is a treasure, a gift of time that she can fill with art. The morning will come, and with it the demands of the court, the petitions of the nobles, the arguments of the clergy. But the night is hers, and she uses it well. We could go on like this, moving from one empress to another, from one night to the next, and the stories would unfold like a scroll of parchment, unrolling slowly, revealing the lives of women who were both prisoners and rulers, both invisible and all-powerful. The Byzantine palace was a city within a city, a world of its own. And at the heart of that world was the Gynaeceum, the women's quarters, a domain of silence and ceremony, of hidden faith and secret ambition. The night watches were the pulse of that domain, the steady heartbeat that kept everything in balance. Without them, the palace would have been vulnerable, chaotic, exposed. With them, it was a fortress of order, a machine of tradition, a place where even the stars above seemed to move in prescribed patterns. So let us rest here for a moment, in the quiet of the Gynaeceum, long after the emperor has retired to his own chambers, long after the servants have snuffed out the last candles. The empress is alone, or nearly so. She sits by a window, looking out at the city of Constantinople spread below her. The lights of the houses twinkle like distant stars. The walls of the city glow faintly in the moonlight. The sea is a dark expanse, dotted with the silhouettes of ships at anchor. She feels the weight of the diadem, even though she is not wearing it. She feels the weight of the empire, even though she rules only within these walls. The night is vast, and she is small, but she is also powerful. She can change the course of history with a whisper, a nod, a letter written in secret. And yet, for now, she is just a woman watching the night, waiting for the dawn, knowing that tomorrow will bring another day of rituals and performances, another night of watches and whispers. The cycle continues, as it has for centuries, as it will for centuries to come. And that, dear listener, is the essence of the Byzantine Empress's life. It is a life of contrasts, confinement and freedom, silence and intrigue, solitude and constant observation. The night watches are both the symbol and the reality of that life. They are the time when the Empress can be herself, but they are also the time when she is most aware of her captivity. The walls that protect her also imprison her. The rituals that elevate her also exhaust her. The servants who serve her also watch her. And through it all, she endures, because she must, because the empire depends on her endurance, because her dynasty depends on her survival. She is a pillar of the state, and the night watches are the quiet reinforcement that keeps that pillar standing. Let the silence settle now, like the dust that gathers on the palace floors, soft and inevitable. The story continues, but it does not rush. The night is still young, and there is time to explore more corridors, more chambers, more lives. But for now, we will rest with this thought, that every empress who ever lived in that golden city knew the same night, the same watches, the same mingled sense of power and imprisonment. And in that shared experience, there is a connection that spans the centuries, a thread of humanity that ties us to them, even as we sit here in our own quiet rooms, listening to their stories. The night watches go on in one form or another for all of us. And that is a comforting thought, is it not? That we are not alone in our wakefulness, that somewhere in some time, another woman has watched the same stars, heard the same distant bell, and felt the same strange mixture of weariness and wonder. The Byzantine Empress lives on in these stories, and in the silence of the night, we can almost hear her sigh. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough, we might catch the whisper of her thoughts drifting through the centuries, carried on the same night air that once brushed her cheek. The palace walls are thick, but memory is thinner, and the stories of these empresses are not entirely lost. They linger in the chronicles, in the fragments of poetry, in the carvings on marble floors, and the faded frescoes on chapel ceilings. They linger, too, in the very shape of the night itself, in the way the moonlight falls across a quiet room, in the sudden creak of a floorboard that sounds like a footstep from long ago. Let us turn now to another empress, one who lived much earlier, in the 6th century. Her name was Theodora, and she is perhaps the most famous of them all. But fame does not mean we cannot approach her gently. She began her life as an actress, a dancer, a woman of the stage, which in those days was not a respectable profession. She rose from the theaters of Constantinople to the throne of the empire, and she did so with wit, resolve, and a deep understanding of human nature. But tonight, I want to imagine her not in the midst of a crisis or a political triumph, but on an ordinary night, perhaps in the spring of the year 532, when the city was still recovering from the great Nika riots, and the palace was still scarred by fire. Theodora is in her private chamber, a room that is not as grand as the state apartments, but more comfortable, more personal. The walls are covered in silk hangings, deep purple and gold, and the floor is laid with mosaics of birds and flowers. A small oil lamp burns on a table beside her bed, casting a warm, unsteady light. She is reading a letter by candlelight, her eyes moving slowly across the parchment. The letter is from a bishop in a distant province, asking for her intercession in a dispute over church lands. She reads it once, then again, then sets it aside with a sigh. She is tired. The day has been long, filled with audiences, petitions, and the endless negotiations that come with ruling an empire. But the night is her own, and she is reluctant to waste it on sleep. She rises from her chair and walks to the window. The window is large, arched, and covered with a thin sheet of alabaster that filters the moonlight into a soft, milky glow. She presses her hand against the cool stone sill and looks out. Below, the courtyard is empty, the fountain silent. Beyond the palace walls, she can see the dome of the Hagia Sophia, still new, still gleaming in the moonlight. It was rebuilt after the riots, and it stands as a symbol of the empire's resilience. She remembers the riots, the chaos, the flames. She remembers standing in this very chamber, listening to the roar of the crowd, and making a decision that would change everything. But tonight, there is only silence, and the memory of that decision is like a distant echo, softened by time. She turns back to the room and looks at the bed. It is a large bed with carved wooden posts and curtains of embroidered linen. The sheets are cool and clean, and the pillows are plump with goose feathers. It invites her to rest, but she is not ready. Instead, she sits on the edge of the bed and begins to remove her jewelry piece by piece. First, the earrings, heavy with pearls and emeralds. Then the necklace, a cascade of sapphires and gold. Then the rings, each one a gift from an emperor or a foreign ambassador. She places them in a small box lined with velvet, and the box is closed with a soft click. She feels lighter without them, as if the weight of the empire is slowly slipping away. Now she unfastens her gown, a rich garment of silk and gold thread, and lets it fall to the floor. She stands in her simple underclothes, a linen shift that reaches her ankles, and she feels almost like a common woman, anonymous and free. She pours water from a ewer into a basin and washes her face, her hands, her feet. The water is cool and refreshing, and the scent of rose petals lingers in it. She dries herself with a soft towel and then slips into the bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. But she does not close her eyes. She lies on her back, staring at the ceiling, where the lamp casts shifting shadows. The shadows dance and waver, and she lets her mind drift. She thinks of her childhood, of the days she spent in the hippodrome, learning to dance and act and please the crowds. She thinks of her mother, who was an actress too, and who died young. She thinks of the men who had loved her or thought they loved her, and of the man she married, the Emperor Justinian, who still loves her, she believes, as much as any emperor can love a woman. She thinks of their daughter, who died as an infant, and of the son they never had. She thinks of the empire, vast and restless, always needing something from her. And then she thinks of nothing. Her mind empties, and she is just a woman in a bed, breathing slowly, listening to the night sounds of the palace. She can hear the distant footsteps of a guard on the ramparts, the muffled voices of servants in the corridor, the whisper of wind through the cracks in the window. These sounds are familiar, comforting, like a lullaby she has heard 1,000 times. She feels her eyelids growing heavy, and she lets them close. The night watch continues outside her door, but inside her, a different kind of watch is ending. She surrenders to sleep, and the dreams that come are gentle, filled with colors and shapes that make no sense but feel true. The night passes, and the lamp burns low, and the stars wheel overhead. Theodora sleeps, and in her sleep, she is neither empress nor actress, neither ruler nor rebel. She is simply herself, a soul at rest, and the night holds her as gently as a mother holds a child. When the first light of dawn creeps through the alabaster window, she will wake, and the diadem will be placed on her head again, and the day will begin anew. But for now, there is only the deep, quiet darkness of the night, and the soft rhythm of her breathing, and the knowledge that she is safe within these walls. And so the cycle continues, not just for Theodora, but for every empress who has ever lain in that bed, or in beds like it, in the vast labyrinth of the Byzantine palace. Each night is a small death, a surrender to the unknown, and each morning is a resurrection, a return to the world of duty and ceremony. The night watches are the borderlands between these two states, the liminal space where the empress is neither fully awake nor fully asleep, where she can be herself without the mask of power. Let us move now to a much later century, to the 10th century, and to an empress named Theophano. She was a woman of great beauty and great ambition, and her story is one of love and murder and intrigue. But again, we will not dwell on the violence. Instead, we will focus on the nights she spent alone, after the passions of the day had cooled. She was the wife of 2 emperors, first Romanos II, then Nikephoros II Phocas, and some say she had a hand in the death of the second. But tonight, we are not judges. We are simply observers, and we will observe her on a night in the winter of the year 969. The palace is cold. The marble floors are icy, and the braziers of charcoal do little to warm the vast halls. Theophano wraps herself in a heavy cloak of fur and sits by the fire in her private sitting room. The fire crackles and pops, and the flames cast a warm, orange glow on her face. She is not reading or writing. She is simply staring into the fire, watching the embers glow and fade. Her mind is elsewhere, perhaps on her children, perhaps on the man she will soon marry, perhaps on the guilt that she may or may not feel. The fire is a comfort, a hypnotic focus that allows her thoughts to wander without direction. A eunuch servant enters silently and places a cup of warm wine on the table beside her. She nods, but does not speak. The servant withdraws, and she is alone again. She picks up the cup and holds it in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. She takes a sip. The wine is spiced with cinnamon and cloves, and it is sweet, almost too sweet. She sets the cup down and returns her gaze to the fire. The flames dance, and she sees shapes in them, faces, memories, possibilities. She does not know if she will sleep tonight. Sometimes she does, sometimes she does not. The night is a canvas on which her fears and hopes are painted, and she cannot look away. Outside, the snow begins to fall, softly at first, then more heavily. It covers the rooftops and the courtyards, muffling all sound. The palace becomes a world within a world, cut off from the city, from the empire, from everything except itself. Theophano hears the snow, or rather, she hears the absence of other sounds, the hush that settles over everything. It is a comforting silence, a silence that feels like forgiveness. She closes her eyes and listens to the fire, to the snow, to her own heartbeat. The night watch passes, and she remains by the fire, still and quiet, until at last her head begins to nod, and she drifts into a shallow, restless sleep, sitting upright in her chair, the fur cloak pulled tight around her. The servant returns to find her asleep and carefully removes the cup of wine, placing it out of reach. He adjusts the cloak so that it covers her shoulders more fully, then steps back and waits. He will stay with her through the night, vigilant and silent, as the snow falls and the fire dies down to embers. He knows that the Empress needs this, not protection, but presence, the simple company of another human being, even one who is not permitted to speak. He sits on a low stool in the corner of the room, and he too waits, watching the shadows, listening to the silence. And so the night passes for Theophano, as it passes for all of them, in fits of wakefulness and dreams, in memories and plans, in the slow, inexorable turning of the hours. The night watches are not just for guards, they are for the empresses themselves, who must watch over their own minds, their own hearts, their own fragile holds on power. The night is a test of endurance, and the empresses must pass it again and again, until the final night when the watches cease and they are released from the palace forever. But we will not think of endings now. The night is still young, and there are more stories to tell. Perhaps we will visit the Empress Irene, who was not content to be a regent, but seized the throne for herself, blinding her own son in the process. It is a dark tale, but we can approach it gently, without dwelling on the violence. Irene was a woman of faith, and she spent many nights in prayer, kneeling before the icons in her private chapel, seeking divine guidance and forgiveness. The chapel was small, with walls covered in gold mosaic and a single lamp that burned before the icon of Christ. She would kneel on the cold marble floor, her hands clasped, her lips moving silently, and the night watched over her. Imagine her there, in the flickering lamplight, her face illuminated by the golden halos of the saints. She is not young anymore, and her knees ache from kneeling, but she does not stop. She prays for her soul, for the soul of her son, for the empire. She prays for the strength to do what must be done, even if it is terrible. The hours pass, and the lamp burns low, and still she prays. The guards outside hear nothing but the occasional sigh, the rustle of fabric, the soft click of her rosary beads. They do not know what she is saying, what she is asking for. They only know that she is there, that she is steadfast, that the night is her time of trial, and she will not yield. When at last she rises, her legs are stiff, and she must steady herself against the wall. She returns to her chamber, and the servants help her to bed, and she lies down, exhausted but peaceful. The prayers have settled something within her, a turbulence that she cannot name. The night watch continues, and she sleeps deeply without dreams. The next day, she will make decisions that will echo through history. But tonight, she is just a woman who has prayed and who trusts that her prayers are heard. So you see, the night watches are not only a matter of guards and sentries, of locked doors and whispered passwords. They are also a matter of the soul, a time when the Empress confronts herself, her faith, her fears, her desires. The palace walls are not just stone and marble. They are the boundaries of a life that is both privileged and constrained. And the night is the only time when those boundaries seem to soften, when the Empress can breathe a little more freely, when she can be, for a few hours, simply a woman. We could continue this way, moving from one Empress to another, from one night to the next, each story a variation on a theme. The theme is the night itself, and the way it shapes the lives of these women. The theme is the watch, the vigil, the endurance. And the theme is the soft, persistent light of the moon, which falls on every palace, every Empress, every sleepless hour, binding them together across the centuries. Let us take a moment to breathe, to let the silence settle like dust on a windowsill. The night is deep, and the stories are many, but there is no need to rush. We can stop here, or we can continue as the mood takes us. The night watches go on, and the Empresses wait, and the city of Constantinople sleeps under the stars. We are all, in some sense, night watchmen, keeping vigil over our own lives, our own histories, our own quiet hopes. And in that shared vigil, there is a strange and beautiful peace. The Byzantine empresses knew it, and now, perhaps, we know it too. So let us stay a little longer in the quiet that follows such a thought. The night is still deep, and the city of Constantinople lies wrapped in shadows and silence. The stars are bright overhead, cold and distant, but they have watched over this place for 1,000 years and will watch for many more. We may as well settle into our own chairs, perhaps pull a blanket a little higher, and let our minds drift to another night, another Empress, another vigil. Imagine, if you will, the Empress Irene, not in the chapel where we left her, but in her private library. This is a room few ever see. It is small and warm, lined with shelves of scrolls and codices, and lit by a single oil lamp that burns with a steady, golden flame. Irene is not praying tonight. She is reading. Her eyes are tired, and the letters blur if she looks too long, but she cannot stop. She is reading the works of the Church Fathers, the lives of the saints, and the sayings of the desert monks. She is searching for something, perhaps a justification, perhaps a comfort. The words are old and familiar, and they wrap around her like a worn cloak. She reads a passage from a homily about forgiveness, and she pauses. The words seem to hang in the air, and she whispers them aloud, testing their weight. "Forgive," says the homily, "as you have been forgiven." She closes the book and sets it aside. The lamp sputters for a moment, then steadies. She sits in the silence, and her thoughts drift to her son, Constantine. He is 6 years old, a boy with bright eyes and a quick laugh. She loves him, of course she loves him. But she also fears him, or rather, she fears what he will become, what others will make of him. The empire needs a strong ruler, and she is not sure she can trust the men who surround him. She has seen too many regents overthrown, too many empresses pushed aside. She will not let that happen, not to her, not to her son. But the cost of that determination is heavy. She knows that even now there are whispers in the palace, conspiracies forming in the shadows. She must act, and soon. But what kind of act? She does not want to think about it. She would rather stay here in this quiet room with the lamp and the books, and pretend that tomorrow is just another day. But she knows it is not. She knows that the night will end and the morning will bring decisions. She sighs, and the sound is soft, like the rustle of pages. She picks up another scroll, but she does not unroll it. She simply holds it, feeling the smooth parchment under her fingers. The night is a pause, a breath held before the plunge. A soft knock at the door. It is her chief eunuch, a man named Staurakios, who has served her faithfully for years. He enters with a tray of warm milk and honey, and a small plate of dried figs. He sets it on the table beside her and steps back, waiting. She thanks him, and he nods. He does not leave. He stands in the corner, as he often does, a silent sentinel. Irene does not mind. She is used to his presence, and it comforts her to know that someone is awake with her, someone who understands the weight of her position. She picks up the cup of milk and sips it. It is warm and sweet, and it settles her stomach. She offers a fig to Staurakios, but he declines with a slight shake of his head. He is fasting tonight for reasons of his own. She does not ask. The night is a time for private devotions. She finishes the milk and sets the cup down. She is tired, but she does not want to sleep. Sleep brings dreams, and dreams bring memories. She would rather stay here in the soft lamplight and let the hours pass. Staurakios moves to extinguish the lamp, but she stops him with a gesture. Not yet. He withdraws his hand and returns to his corner. She picks up the scroll again, unrolls it, and begins to read. It is a letter from a monk in the provinces, a man of great holiness, who writes to her of the transience of power and the eternal nature of the soul. She reads it slowly, letting each word sink in. She will answer him tomorrow. Tonight, she will let his words carry her into a calm that is almost peaceful. And so the night passes, not in dramatic events, but in these small, quiet rituals. The lamp burns lower, and the shadows deepen. Irene's head nods, and she catches herself, straightening. Storakios steps forward and gently takes the scroll from her hands. She does not resist. He helps her to her feet, and she leans on his arm as they walk to her chamber. The corridors are dark, lit only by the occasional torch. The guards bow as she passes, but she does not notice. She is half asleep, moving on instinct. He leads her to her bed, and she lies down, still in her clothes. He pulls a blanket over her and stands for a moment, watching her breathe. Then he withdraws, leaving her to the night. She sleeps, and in her sleep, she dreams. She dreams of a garden, green and lush, with a fountain in the center. She is walking through it, and the sun is warm on her face. Her son is there, laughing, playing with a ball. She calls to him, and he runs to her, and she picks him up. He is light, so light. She holds him close, and she feels a love so pure it hurts. But then the garden fades, and she is back in the palace, in the room of the icons, and the lamp is burning low, and she is kneeling, and she is crying. She wakes with a start, her cheeks wet. The room is dark, and she is alone. The dream was a gift and a warning. She does not know which. She lies still, listening to her own heartbeat. The night watch calls the hour from the courtyard, a distant voice that seems to come from another world. She counts the strokes. 4 in the morning. She has a few more hours before dawn. She closes her eyes and tries to return to the garden, but it is gone. All she sees is the flame of the lamp and the golden icons and the dark marble floor. She prays silently, not for forgiveness, but for strength. And slowly, the prayer becomes a rhythm, a breathing, a lullaby. She slips back into sleep, and this time there are no dreams. The morning comes, as mornings always do, with the first light filtering through the high windows, and the sounds of the palace stirring to life. Irene wakes to the bustle of servants, the clatter of trays, the murmur of voices. She sits up, and the night is already receding, like a tide pulling back from the shore. She will remember the dream and the prayer, but she will not speak of them. They are hers, private and sacred. She dresses, and she prepares for the day's duties. The decisions will be made, the conspiracies will be faced, and the empire will continue to turn. But the night will come again, and again she will find her way to the lamp and the books and the silence. Perhaps we can leave Irene there in the early morning light and move to another empress altogether. There's one who ruled not with prayer, but with intellect, a woman named Anna Komnene. She was not an empress in her own right, but she was the daughter of an emperor, and she wrote the great history of her father's reign, the Alexiad. She spent many nights writing by candlelight in her study in the palace of Constantinople. She was a scholar, and she knew the value of a long, uninterrupted night. In her writings, she describes the palace in vivid detail, the way the light fell on the mosaics, the texture of the silk curtains, the sound of the guards' footsteps in the corridor. She was a woman who observed everything, and she stored her observations like treasures in the vault of her memory. Imagine Anna at her desk, the inkwell by her side, the quill in her hand. She is writing about a battle, or a diplomatic intrigue, or the death of a beloved relative. The words flow slowly, carefully, each one chosen with precision. She pauses to dip the quill, and she looks out the window. The moon is full, and it casts a silver light on the rooftops of the city. She can see the dome of Hagia Sophia in the distance, and she thinks of the generations of emperors and empresses who have worshipped there, who have prayed and wept and rejoiced beneath that vast dome. She is writing their story, but she is also writing her own. The night is her collaborator, her confessor. It is the time when the truth can be spoken, even if only to the page. She writes until her hand cramps, until her eyes are dry and burning. She sets the quill down and rubs her temples. Room is silent except for the scratch of a mouse in the wall. She does not mind the sound. It is a companion of sorts. She takes a sip of water from a cup that has gone cold, and she looks at the pages she has filled. They are many, and they are good. She feels a quiet satisfaction, a sense that she is doing something important, something that will outlast the palace and the empire. She will rest now, but only for a few hours. Tomorrow night, she will return to the desk, and the night will welcome her again. We could go on, night after night, empress after empress, but perhaps we should pause here in the soft light of Anna's study and let the silence settle. The night watches continue, as they always have, and the empresses of Byzantium keep their vigils, each in her own way, each in her own room, under the same stars. We are with them in spirit as we listen to the quiet and feel the slow passage of time. There is no need to rush. The night is long, and the stories are many, and we can return to them whenever we wish. For now, let the image of Anna at her desk stay with you, a woman alone with her thoughts, her ink, and her history. The lamp flickers, but she does not notice. She is lost in the past, in the lives of those who came before, and she is giving them voice. The night is her time, and she uses it well. And perhaps, as you drift toward sleep yourself, you can imagine yourself in a similar quiet room with a similar lamp and a similar task. The night is a gift for all of us, a chance to think, to dream, to write our own stories, however small. And in that, we are no different from the empresses of 1,000 years ago. So breathe deeply and let the night hold you. The watches pass and the hours slip by, and there is peace in the stillness. The Byzantine empresses knew this peace, and now, perhaps, you know it too. So breathe deeply and let the night hold you. The watches pass and the hours slip by, and there is peace in the stillness. The Byzantine empresses knew this peace, and now, perhaps, you know it too. But the night is not only for stillness. It is also for listening. If you listen closely, you might hear the soft echo of footsteps on marble, the rustle of silk, the distant murmur of prayers. The palace of Constantinople is never truly silent, even in the deepest hours. There's always someone awake, someone watching, someone waiting. One such watcher was the Empress Theodora, the wife of Justinian, a woman who rose from the theater to the throne. She was known for her sharp tongue and her even sharper mind, but in the quiet of the night, she was something else entirely. She was a woman who had seen the raw edge of the world, who had danced for crowds and endured their jeers, and who now slept on silk pillows beneath a ceiling of gold. But the night did not forget her origins. It brought memories, not always welcome. She would lie awake, staring at the dark, and remember the smell of the crowds, the heat of the torches, the fear, and the exhilaration of being watched by 1,000 eyes. And yet, she learned to use the night as a tool. She would call for her secretary, a man named Procopius, who later wrote of her with a mixture of admiration and venom. But in those nights, he was simply a scribe, taking down her thoughts, her letters, her instructions for the next day's affairs. She dictated with a low, steady voice, her eyes half closed, as if she were speaking from a dream. Procopius wrote quickly, his quill scratching across the parchment, and the only sound in the room was that scratching and the occasional crackle of the lamp. She would pause sometimes and look at him with a gaze that could pierce stone. "You will write this exactly as I say," she would murmur. And he did. He had no choice. Those letters were sharp and cunning, full of threats and promises, alliances and betrayals. They were the threads that held the empire together, or sometimes pulled it apart. Theodora knew that power was not a thing of daylight and ceremony. It was forged in the dark, in the whispered word, in the sealed scroll delivered by a trusted hand. She spent many nights writing such letters, and many more nights reading the letters that came in return. She kept a small chest beside her bed, locked with a silver key, and in it she stored the most dangerous secrets. The night was her accomplice. It hid her work, and it hid her weariness. Sometimes, when the work was done, she would dismiss Procopius and sit alone in the dark. She would open the chest and take out a small object, a token from her past. A worn coin, a piece of fabric from a costume she had worn as a young actress. She would hold it in her palm and feel the weight of memory. Then she would put it away, close the chest, and lie down. The coins and fabric had no power now. The only power that mattered was the power she held in her hands, the power of the throne. And the night was the time when she reminded herself of that truth. But not all empresses were as fierce as Theodora. There was another, named Zoe, who lived in the 11th century, a woman of great beauty and even greater patience. She was the daughter of an emperor, and she married 3 times, each husband becoming emperor in turn. She knew the palace intimately, every corridor, every hidden alcove, every shadow where a secret could be whispered. And she knew the night. She spent many nights not in state affairs, but in quiet craftsmanship. She had a passion for making perfumes and ointments. In her private chambers, she kept a small laboratory with vials of oils, jars of dried herbs, and a copper still. Imagine Zoe in the lamplight, wearing a simple linen gown, her hair loose, her sleeves rolled up. She is grinding petals with a mortar and pestle, adding drops of this and that, mixing with a wooden spoon. The fragrance fills the room, sweet and heavy, like a garden in bloom. She works slowly, methodically, her movements precise. She is not thinking of the empire or the court. She is thinking of the scent, the balance of rose and myrrh, the way a single drop of lavender can change everything. The night is her workshop, and she is its mistress. She would often work until her hands were stained and her eyes burned from the fumes. Then she would pour the finished perfume into a small glass bottle, seal it with wax, and set it aside. She had dozens of such bottles, lined up on a shelf. Some were gifts for friends, some were for her own use, and some were for purposes she did not speak of. There were rumors that she knew the properties of every herb, that she could cure a fever or induce a sleep that lasted a little too long. But those were just rumors, and the night kept them safe. When she was done, she would wash her hands in a basin of rosewater, dry them on a soft cloth, and sit back in her chair. She would look at her bottles, each one a tiny universe of scent, and she would smile. It was a small pleasure, but it was hers alone. The palace could be a cage, but in that room, with those bottles, she was free. She would blow out the lamp and sit in the dark, letting the last traces of fragrance settle around her like a veil. Then she would rise, walk to her bed, and lie down, surrounded by the memory of flowers. And then there was the night watch itself, the men who patrolled the corridors and courtyards, their torches casting flickering shadows on the walls. They knew the empresses better than anyone, though they rarely spoke to them. They saw them in the early hours when the mask of ceremony slipped. They saw Irene walking with Starachios, her face pale and tired. They saw Anna, her study window glowing until dawn. They saw Theodora, her silhouette sharp against the curtain, dictating with iron calm. They saw Zoe, emerging from her laboratory with a faint smile and a trail of scent. The guards would nod as the empresses passed, but they would not meet their eyes. They understood that the night was a private time, a time for secrets, and they kept their own secrets. They knew which doors were left unlocked, which corridors were empty, which shadows could hide a messenger or a spy. They were the silent guardians of the palace, and the night was their kingdom. They would call the hours, their voices echoing through the halls, a reminder that time was passing, that the world was still turning, even in the dark. If you listen, you can almost hear those calls, muffled by centuries. They are part of the fabric of the night, woven into the silence. And the empresses, long gone, are woven in too. Their footsteps, their whispers, their sighs, all linger in the spaces between the stones. The palace of Constantinople is a ruin now, but the night remembers. It holds the memory of every lamp that burned, every prayer that was murmured, every tear that fell on the cold marble. So when you lie awake in your own quiet room, you are not alone. You are part of a long tradition of watchers, of thinkers, of dreamers. The Byzantine empresses kept their vigils, and now you keep yours. The night is the same, even if the walls are different. The stars are the same. The silence is the same. And in that silence, you can find a connection to those women of 1,000 years ago. They knew what it meant to be awake when the rest of the world slept. They knew the loneliness and the freedom. They knew the gift of the watch. Breathe deeply and let your thoughts drift. Perhaps you see a lamp flickering in a distant room, a woman bending over a scroll, her face hidden in shadow. Perhaps you hear the scratch of a quill, the soft rustle of silk, the distant bark of a guard calling the hour. These sounds are not gone. They are only waiting, patient as the night itself. And as you settle deeper into your pillow, you may find that you are not only listening, you are also being listened to. The night hears you just as it heard them. It holds you just as it held them. And so the story continues, not as a tale of drama and conquest, but as a quiet thread of light in the dark. Each empress adds her own strand, her own hour, her own breath. Irene, Anna, Theodora, Zoe, they are all there, woven into the fabric of the night. And you too are a part of it. Your wakefulness, your thoughts, your quiet breathing, they are the same as theirs. The night does not distinguish between empress and listener. It simply holds and waits and offers its stillness to whoever will take it. So take it now. Let the stillness fill you. Let the hours pass without counting. The night watch continues, but you do not need to watch. You can rest. The empresses have kept their vigils, and now they are at peace. And you too can find peace in the knowledge that the night is a friend, not a foe. It is a time for reflection, for solitude, for the soft embrace of memory. Close your eyes and let the images fade. The lamp burns low. The shadows deepen, and all is quiet, all is well. But wait, the night holds more stories, as if the silence itself has a memory that cannot be emptied. There is always another empress, another lamp, another hour of quiet watching. And perhaps it is not the great acts of state that linger longest in the dark, but the small moments, the ones that never made it into the chronicles. Consider the Empress Irene, who ruled in her own right after her son was blinded. She was a stern woman, the histories say, a woman of iron will. But the night shows us a different Irene. In the hours before dawn, when even the guards dozed at their posts, she would walk to the chapel attached to her chambers. It was a tiny space, barely large enough for two people, with a single icon of the Virgin Mary, its gold leaf catching the light of a single oil lamp. Irene would kneel on the cold stone floor, her knees aching, and she would pray. Not for power, not for victory, but for forgiveness. She carried guilt like a heavy garment, and the night was the only time she could take it off. Her prayers were whispered, barely audible, like the rustling of silk. She would ask the Virgin to watch over her son, whom she had blinded to secure the throne. She would ask for his soul and for her own. The tears would fall on the stone, darkening it, and she would wipe them away with the back of her hand. Then she would rise, her legs stiff, and return to her bed. She would not sleep. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant call of the night watch. The night was her confessor, and it never betrayed her. And then there was the Empress Pulcheria, who lived in the 5th century. She was a woman of deep faith and even deeper discipline. She never married, choosing instead to dedicate herself to the church and the empire. She was known for her vigilance, both over the state and over her own soul. At night, she would retreat to her private oratory, a room adorned with mosaics of saints and angels. She would light a single candle and read from the scriptures, her voice soft but steady. She believed that the night was a time for spiritual warfare, a time when demons crept close to whisper doubts. So she read aloud, as if to drown out their voices. Sometimes she would write letters to bishops and monks, asking for their prayers. She would dip her quill in ink and write by the flickering light, her handwriting careful and even. The letters would be sealed with wax and sent out with the morning couriers, but the act of writing was her own vigil. She felt closer to God in the quiet hours, when the world was still and the only sound was the scratch of her pen. She would finish at the third hour, when the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, and she would pray one final prayer before the day's business began. But perhaps the most tender of all night rituals belonged to an empress whose name is almost forgotten, a woman named Eudokia. She was the wife of Emperor Theodosius II, and she was a poet. She wrote long, winding verses about the beauty of the world and the sadness of the human heart. At night, she would sit at her window, a scroll spread before her, and she would compose. The lamplight would catch her face, making her look younger than her years. She wrote about the stars, how they seemed like tiny lamps hung by an invisible hand. She wrote about the sea, which she could hear from her window, a soft murmur like a distant lullaby. She wrote about the loneliness of the palace, the way the corridors seemed to stretch forever in the dark. And she wrote about her husband, who was often away on campaigns or lost in his own thoughts. She wrote about the ache of waiting, the hope that he would return safe. Sometimes she would read her poems aloud to herself, testing the rhythm of the words. The sound would echo in the empty room, and she would imagine an audience of shadows listening. She would smile at the thought, and then she would make a small correction, crossing out a word and writing another in its place. The night was patient, and it never interrupted her. She could work for hours, until her eyes grew heavy and the words began to blur. Then she would close the scroll, blow out the lamp, and lie down. The poem would wait for morning, safe in its silence, and the guards, those silent witnesses, would hear her voice sometimes, a low murmur through the door. They never understood the words, but they knew the sound of creation. It was a sound as old as the city itself, the sound of a mind at work, shaping the chaos into something beautiful. They would shift their weight from one foot to the other and continue their patrol, their footsteps falling softly on the stone. The night in the Byzantine palace was not just a time for work or prayer. It was also a time for small joys. The empresses would sometimes gather in the garden, if the season allowed, to walk among the lemon trees and the rose bushes. The air would be cool and fragrant, and the moon would cast long shadows on the path. They would walk slowly, arm in arm, speaking in low voices. They talked of trivial things, the weather, the news from the provinces, the taste of the figs at breakfast. They laughed softly, the sound swallowed by the darkness. For a few hours, they were not empresses, but women, sharing secrets and friendship. The gardens were a rare space of freedom. The walls were high, but the sky was open, and the stars seemed closer. One empress, whose name is not recorded, would often lie on a marble bench and count the stars, as if she could number them. She would whisper the numbers to herself, and the guards would hear her and smile. They would not disturb her. They understood that the night was for dreaming, even for an empress. And the night itself, the physical night of Constantinople, was a character in the story. The sea breeze carried the smell of salt and fish, mingling with the scent of incense from the churches. The sound of waves lapping against the city walls was a constant lullaby, a rhythm that underpinned every hour. Sometimes a ship would pass, its lanterns bobbing in the distance, and the empresses would watch it from their windows, wondering where it was going, what cargo it carried, what stories its sailors would tell. The city was never truly silent. There was always the distant bark of a dog, the cry of a night bird, the rumble of a cart returning late from the market. But inside the palace, the sounds were muffled, as if the walls themselves swallowed noise. The thick stone, the heavy tapestries, the carpets on the floors, all absorbed sound and created a cocoon of quiet. The empresses moved through this quiet like ghosts, their footsteps barely audible, their voices hushed. And so the night passed, hour after hour, each one marked by the guard's call. The first hour, the second, the third, until the light began to pale in the east. The empresses would see it first, a faint grayness at the edge of the window, and they would know that the night was ending. They would feel a pang of regret mixed with relief. The night was theirs, but the day belonged to the court, to the obligations and the ceremony. They would take one last look at the world before the sun rose, and then they would prepare for the morning. Theodora, for all her iron will, would sometimes sit by the window and watch the sunrise. She would see the golden light spread over the sea, and she would think of her past, of the days when she had no palace, no power, only her wits and her beauty. She would feel a strange gratitude, not for the power, but for the night itself, for the time it gave her to be alone, to remember, to breathe. She would remain there until the first rays touched her face, and then she would rise, and the empress would become the empress again. And we, too, can imagine ourselves in that dawn light. We have kept the vigil with them, through the stories, through the centuries. The night is ending, and we are still here, a little drowsy, a little full of the past. The lamp has burned low, and the shadows have softened into gray. It is time to let the night go, to let the empresses return to their history, and to let ourselves drift into the gentle arms of sleep. The night watch is over. The world is quiet. And you, dear listener, have been a part of something ancient and beautiful. You have walked the corridors of the Byzantine palace. You have seen the lamplight on the scrolls. You have smelled the perfume and the incense. You have heard the guard's call, and you have felt the stillness of the hours. Now it is time to rest. Close your eyes and let the images fade. The empresses are gone, but the night remains. And in the night, there is peace. There is always peace. So let your breathing slow, let your thoughts soften, let the darkness wrap around you like a blanket. The night holds you as it held them, and it wishes you only dreams. Sweet dreams of marble halls and moonlit gardens, of whispered prayers and silent letters. Sweet dreams of a time long past, but not forgotten. The night remembers, and now you remember too. And with that memory, you can sleep, knowing that you are part of a long and gentle story. Good night, dear listener. Good night. And yet, the night is never quite over, is it? Even as the words of farewell settle in the air, there is a lingering echo, a soft footfall that has not yet faded. The empresses have left the windows. The lamps are extinguished, but the palace itself holds the memory of their presence. The stones remember the warmth of their hands, the tapestries remember the whisper of their robes, and the guards, even as they prepare for the morning shift, carry the imprint of the hours they shared. So perhaps we can stay just a little longer, not to disturb the peace, but to witness the final moments of this ancient night, before the sun claims the sky and the world of the court awakens. In the darkest hour, just before dawn, there is a stillness so deep that it seems to breathe. The air in the corridors becomes heavy, almost liquid, and every sound is muffled as if by a great weight. The empresses who have kept the vigil now feel the pull of sleep, but there is one among them who resists. She is a young woman, newly married, still unused to the rhythms of the palace. Her name is not recorded in the histories, but we know she came from a distant province, a land of olive groves and whitewashed villages. She was chosen for her beauty and her piety, and she arrived at the palace with a heart full of wonder and fear. On this particular night, she cannot sleep. She lies in her bed, the sheets cool against her skin, and she listens to the silence. The room is dark, but she knows every corner of it by touch. The carved chest at the foot of the bed, the small icon of the Virgin Mary on the wall, the heavy curtains that block out the moonlight. She has been here for 3 months, and still the palace feels like a labyrinth. She misses the open fields of her childhood, the sound of goats bleating in the distance, the smell of thyme and wild sage. Here, everything is polished and perfumed, and she feels like a stranger in her own life. She rises from the bed, her bare feet silent on the mosaic floor. She moves to the window and draws the curtain just enough to see the sky. The stars are beginning to fade, their light growing pale. She knows that in a few minutes, the first hint of color will appear over the sea. She has watched this transformation many times now, and each time it feels like a small miracle. She thinks of her mother, who used to wake her at dawn to help with the bread, and she feels a pang of homesickness so sharp that it takes her breath away. She must not weep. The Empress must not weep, but she allows herself a single tear, which she wipes away with the back of her hand. Then she hears something, a soft, scratching sound from the hallway. She freezes, her heart quickening. But it is only a cat, one of the many that roam the palace, keeping the mice at bay. The cat pauses at her door, mews once, and then pads away. The sound is strangely comforting, a reminder that even in this gilded cage, there are small, ordinary lives. She decides to walk. She knows the palace guards will not stop her, for the Empress may wander where she pleases within the walls, as long as she does not disturb the Emperor's chambers. She ties a shawl over her shift and opens her door. The corridor is lit by a single lamp at the far end, its flames steady and low. She walks slowly, her footsteps barely audible. She passes the doors of other rooms, rooms where other women sleep, some of them also empresses, some of them servants, all of them dreaming their own dreams. She reaches a small courtyard, open to the sky. Here there is a fountain, its water falling into a marble basin with a sound like gentle rain. She sits on the edge of the basin and dips her fingers into the water. It is cold, so cold that it sends a shiver up her arm. She brings her wet fingers to her forehead and makes the sign of the cross. It is a small ritual, a prayer without words. She feels the coolness spread across her skin, and she closes her eyes. In the distance, she hears the first call of a rooster. It is a thin, sharp sound cutting through the stillness. She knows that soon the palace will stir. The cooks will light the fires in the kitchen. The chamberlains will begin their rounds. The emperor will be woken by his attendants. But for now, this moment is hers alone. She breathes deeply, taking in the scent of wet stone and night-blooming jasmine. She lets her thoughts drift, like the water in the fountain, aimless and peaceful. She thinks of the poems of Eudokia, which she has read in secret, hidden among the books in the library. She does not fully understand them, but the rhythm of the words stays with her like a lullaby. She thinks of the strength of Theodora, whose story is told in whispers, a tale of a woman who rose from the streets to rule an empire. She thinks of the quiet piety of Pulcheria, who devoted her life to faith and service. And she thinks of herself, a name that will be forgotten, a face that will fade from memory. But in this moment, she is real. She is here. She is part of something vast and ancient. The sky begins to lighten, the deep blue softening into gray, then into a blush of pink and gold. She watches as the first rays of sunlight touch the dome of the Hagia Sophia, far in the distance, and the city starts to sing. The bells of 100 churches begin to ring, their voices overlapping in a chorus of bronze and hope. She stands, her legs stiff from sitting, and she stretches her arms above her head. The night is over, truly over now. She turns back towards her room, but before she goes, she looks up at the fading stars. One last star, the morning star, shines with a bright, steady light. She makes a wish, a small wish for peace for herself and for the city. Then she walks back through the corridors, now filling with light and sound, and she lies down on her bed, still dressed in her shawl. The morning will come to her with its duties and its ceremonies, but for a few more minutes she will rest. And as she drifts toward sleep, she hears the guard's final call, the one that marks the change of watch. It is a phrase spoken in a low voice, passed from one soldier to another, a ritual as old as the walls themselves. The words are lost to history, but the meaning is clear. The night has been kept, the palace is safe, and the new day begins. So we too can let the night recede. The stories we have shared, the images we have painted in our minds, they will linger like the scent of incense in a chapel. The empresses have returned to their history, and we are left with the quiet of our own rooms. The lamp has burned out, the fire has faded to embers, and the world outside is still and cool. You have been a patient listener, a gentle companion on this journey through the hours of darkness. You have walked with empresses and guards. You have heard the scratch of pens and the murmur of prayers. You have smelled the salt air and the perfume of roses. And now it is truly time to close your eyes, to let the weight of the night settle over you like a soft blanket. The night watch is over. The palace sleeps. And you, dear friend, may sleep as well. There is nothing more to fear, nothing more to hold, just the steady rhythm of your own breath, the gentle beat of your heart, and the knowledge that you are cradled in a story that has been told for 1,000 years. Good night, sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle light of a Byzantine dawn. And yet, even as the words of farewell settle into the air, there is one more thing that lingers, like a half-remembered melody. It is not a duty, not a story, but a sensation, the feeling of being watched by time itself. The Byzantine dawn has broken 1,000 times since that night, 100,000 times, and each dawn has been different, yet the same. The light that touched the dome of Hagia Sophia on that morning is the same light that touches your window now. The same warmth, the same gold, the same promise that the night will always yield, that the darkness is never final. Perhaps you feel it too, as you lie there in the quiet of your own room. The weight of the covers, the softness of the pillow, the gentle rhythm of your breathing. You are not in Constantinople, not in a palace of marble and mosaic, but the distance between then and now is not so great. The human heart has not changed. The longing for safety, for peace, for a moment of stillness, these are the same. The empresses who walked those corridors, who kept their vigils, who whispered their prayers, they were not so different from you. They had their fears, their hopes, their small triumphs and silent sorrows. They too lay awake at night, listening to the sounds of a world that seemed both too large and too small. And so, as you drift toward the edge of sleep, you might imagine that you are not alone. The young empress from the olive groves, the one whose name we do not know, she is there beside you, not in body, but in spirit. She is sitting on the edge of a fountain, her fingers trailing in cold water, and she is looking up at the same morning star that you might see if you opened your eyes. She is making the same wish, a wish for peace, for herself, and for the city. And the city in this moment is not Constantinople. It is your home, your room, the place where you rest. She is wishing peace for you. Let that thought settle like a feather drifting downward. Let it rest on your chest, light and warm. The night has been long, but the night is also kind. It wraps around you, not to trap you, but to hold you gently until the light returns. The guards have changed their watch. The cooks have lit their fires. The bells have rung. But you do not need to rise. You do not need to answer any call. The only call now is the call of sleep, soft and irresistible. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. Let the images of the palace fade, like colors dissolving into water. Let the scent of jasmine and incense drift away. Let the sound of the fountain become the sound of rain on a quiet street, or the whisper of wind through leaves. You are safe. You are here. You are held by a story that began centuries ago and continues still, in this moment, in the silence between your heartbeats. The Byzantine dawn will come again tomorrow, and the day after, and for as long as the world turns. But for now, the dawn is not your concern. Your concern is only this breath, and the next, and the soft darkness that cradles you. The empresses have gone to their rest, the guards have gone to their posts, and you have gone to the place that all travelers seek, the place where time slows and the mind finds peace. Good night once more. Sleep well, truly well. And may the gentle light of that ancient dawn, the light that warmed the stones of a forgotten empire, find you in your dreams and leave a trace of gold upon your resting heart.